Hey everybody, it's Mr. Marchetti yet again. I'm here to talk to you about our third essay, which is the contemporary content essay, as you can see here, due the 24th of November or around there. I know it's a busy week because of Thanksgiving and all that. So we can talk about, moving that day around if need be. Um, so essay three, for some people, is the hardest because I think it's the one that the aspects of it might be the most difficult because it's one that they're not as familiar with, and it's the one that is sort of asking you to do something a little bit outside of our English class setting. So it does, when you read it, it does have to do a little bit with potentially with history, politics, culture, or society. But this is not a history class or an anthropology class or a geopolitical class or anything along those cultural studies class. It's an English class. So first and foremost, your job is to write, and my aim here is not to have you, um, you know, have to do hours and hours and hours and hours and hours of research. Much like I said with essay two, this is not. There is research to be done here, but it's not. If you're struggling with it, we can figure out ways around it. The chief um, goal here, priority number one, is the writing and how you sort of engage with the topics. So, that being said, it does, I think, help a little bit to discuss this one a little more explicitly, right? So, um, you are basically going to choose at least two, and I have them highlighted here and quoted, texts to help you sort of think about a moment in history, which again I put could be historical, political, cultural, social, pop cultural, whatever works for you. Now, that text doesn't have to be a traditional text, a book, an article, a newspaper, magazine. It can be, music, film, art of any kind, video games, comic books, graphic novels, anything along those lines. Really, anything that you might want to use will probably work for me. Just run it by me. Um, the text you choose, and this is important too, should be something that you have a familiarity with. So if you're discussing two films, hopefully they're two films you have some background in, not just like 2 3 hour movies that you now have to watch, which you can do, obviously. It's manageable, but I'm not trying to get you to do more work than you need to do. You may need to reread, you may need to review, you may need to re listen to different things to be able to engage with them in new ways. My hope is that you're not like bogged down by having to do all of that. If one of your texts is a book or two books or something along those lines, obviously my aim is not that you have to engage with all like 300 or 400 or 500 pages of each book. It could just be a theme from that book and a theme from the other book, and then you're comparing them, talking about how they connect to history in this country or another country or the world, um, that sort of thing. So it might just be you might just be discussing one chapter of each book or one page of each book. To be honest, you can focus on more, but my aim is not to make you do more when you don't need to. So please think about that as you're doing it, and ask me questions as you're doing it. Um, so there's sort of two traditional ways to start this. That was four, but two traditional ways to start this. You can either start by choosing the moment you sort of want to think about, so a moment in history or culture or society that just interests you, and then thinking about what your text might be from there. Or you can start with just two related texts and think about how they connect to a time period. Obviously, when you're discussing these things, some background information about whatever the texts are is going to be important. But I'm, again, with anything here, far more interested in what you have to say about the text than you giving me a synopsis of two movies that I probably have already seen or know about. So it's more about how you sort of use those texts to talk about a moment. We'll talk about a few examples in a second. Um, you can use more than two, but anything beyond two should be used to supplement your other two. I think juggling three main texts in a connective way like this in 3 pages is just too much. And I think two is fine, but you definitely could have a third or fourth, even smaller content piece in there if you would like. This is an important piece right here. I'm trying to highlight it. There it is. The aim, goal, and flow of this essay are up to you to construct and oversee. you're not making a de facto statement about an era. I mean, you're not making the end-all, be-all statement about like the 1960s in America. You might be talking about one specific aspect of America in the 1960s, right? Rather, you are simply using art forms to draw parallels to real-world events. And I will give you some examples, and we can go from there. So, pop up here. My two texts, so this is just a sample, two potential texts would be one, the film Fruitvale Station from 2013, which is about the shooting death of Oscar Grant III in 2008, and has to do a lot with, obviously, race and racism in the country, police brutality, over-policing, police militarization, a lot of different aspects in there. A lot of different things to talk about in there. So I would be comparing this with something contemporary. Hecla Magoon's How It Went Down, which was written in 2014, so a year after the movie came out, and 6 years after Oscar Grant's murder. And this book has to do with, again, issues of race and issues of, it has some different pieces about gang violence and gang lifestyle, and definitely issues of, well, potential issues of like religion and police, and there's a lot of different aspects to it. And then as a supplement, obviously, in having conversations about both of these, one is a fictional account and one is a piece of historical fiction, basically, because it is a moment in history, but there are some things obviously embellished and changed potentially. I also had, and this is just Wikipedia as a starting point, but the actual events as they happened in history and talk about that. And I think that's nice to have in terms of like you want to get your facts straight, but also as potentially a supplementary piece of information that you can use to talk about now in the U.S. and issues of race and racism. And your thesis about that might be a million and one different things. That's just one potential. Another potential would be looking at depictions of the Vietnam War in sort of two different main medias here, but they're kind of the same, but you'll see they're handled differently. So we have 1986's narrative film, right, Platoon, which is about soldiers' experiences in Vietnam. And then basically in the same time period, we have, if it loads, Dear America, Letters Home from Vietnam, which is made a year later, which is a documentary about soldiers sending letters home and hearing those letters read by different actors and things along those lines. It's a great, both films are great, but obviously one is a documentary, so it's nonfiction with sort of fiction elements, and one is a piece of fiction that has to do with, again, like Fruitvale Station, it's a historical fiction. Interestingly enough, I think like some of the lead actors in Platoon actually do some of the voiceover work in the film. And then, again, as a supplement, I had an article from the New York Times when Platoon came out about the film itself. And this paper, if this was what I was doing, could take it could go down all manner of avenues. Which depiction is more harrowing, which one feels more real, and why? How do you connect with these characters and these people, and how is America depicting the war? Why are we looking at Vietnam in the 1980s when the war is basically over at this point? And why is this all of a sudden in the 80s we're doing this? There's a lot of different avenues you can go down, and I think that would also make a very interesting, compelling paper. So yeah, again, the hard part is the starting point here. I think it's coming up with what you want to talk about and then going from there. If you have any struggles with your topics and figuring out what you want to do and what you want to write about, just shoot me an email. I certainly can throw you some ideas, but I think if you're going to shoot me an email, at least have some starting points or potential text or one text that you want to use, and I can always work with you to create a second text that would work. And be creative with it, have fun with it, and do stuff that you're comfortable talking about and discussing, and stuff that you'll want to talk about and discuss. And I think you'll find your work will be stronger as a result. So yeah, just stay in touch about this and anything else, and I will be available for any questions anytime anyone needs. Thanks, guys.